everyone. Happy New Year 2025, and welcome to episode 11 of the Ecocide Report, your regular update from Stop Ecocide International. Today I'm here with my friend, Jojo Method, co-founder of Stop Ecocide International, and we're going to be doing both a roundup of all of the excellent progress from 2024, as well as talking about things to look forward to in this year, 2025. Jojo, how are you doing?
Really well, and it's great to see you again. It's been a while, and it's been an incredibly busy time. There's been an awful lot going on. Let's dive in.
Excellent. Well, I just promised it, so you might as well go for a recap. Talk to us about how you finished 2024.
Well, 2024 was an incredibly exciting year for us. Not only was there the EU Environmental Crime Directive that was adopted earlier in the year, but hugely significantly for this whole initiative around ecocide law, a formal proposal was actually made at the International Criminal Court by 3 sovereign states, Vanuatu, Fiji and Samoa, and that happened in September in the working group on amendments of the Assembly for the International Criminal Court, the Assembly of States Parties, and that's now placed this conversation formally onto the diplomatic table, and that's a huge milestone. It means that effectively the train has left the station. This is the beginning of the real diplomatic journey now, and that's hugely exciting and rewarding. And of course, the first thing to say is just huge gratitude and admiration for those states for having the courage to really step up and step forward with this legal initiative for the recognition of ecocide.
That's outstanding. It's going to be impossible to talk about 2024 and the progress made without mentioning both of the COPs. Do you want to sort of expand on those?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a strong presence at the Biodiversity COP in Cali in Colombia, which turned out to be another major milestone for this work, because that was where a leading African country, the Democratic Republic of Congo, publicly announced its support for Vanuatu, Fiji and Samoa's initiative. In other words, gave its backing at the governmental level to the international criminalization of ecocide. And that took place in a press conference in Cali. So that was a really very key moment for us, because obviously the initial sort of impetus coming from the Pacific, hugely understandable, front line, I should say, of impacts of climate change. But of course, Democratic Republic of Congo brings in the whole perspective of one of the 3 biggest rainforest areas in the world, hugely diverse and rich natural resources and ecosystems. And so to have a country like DRC step up and say, this is absolutely necessary, we believe this should be in place and we're going to back this all the way, this is really hugely important. So that was a really major moment alongside the discussions of the CBD COP in Cali. And that we also had a number of events there. We had meetings with a number of different government representatives, including a meeting with the hosting country, Colombia, which actually has some provision for ecocide already in its penal code, and the current government is very open to and proactive around environmental protection. So that's also very encouraging. In terms of when you said COPs, you talked about that obviously brings in 2, and of course the other one that you're probably thinking of is the climate COP, which last year happened in Azerbaijan. We actually didn't attend that COP in the sense that we were only offered 1 badge to attend the COP, as were a number of organisations that we regularly work with, and it's difficult to bring a team and significant input in that way. And we felt that it was more important for us to be at the Biodiversity COP, but also, and we'll talk about this in a minute, at the Assembly of States Parties in The Hague. So that's the Assembly of States Parties to the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. And that has always been a key focus for us. That said, it's interesting to note that Azerbaijan is actually a country where ecocide law itself was moving forward last year. So Azerbaijan actually announced they had proposed, there's an ecocide law proposal there that actually passed through its first reading towards the end of the summer last year. So interesting to note that some efforts at least were being made by the host country to take some action around protection of the environment. whether this was due to the visibility of being the host country of the climate COP, we don't know, but we certainly applaud any country that is moving forward with legislating for ecocide. So that was also very good news. And they're not the only country. I mean, there are a number of individual jurisdictions where ecocide law proposals have been moving forward. And, you know, whether that's national, such as Peru, for example, they recently passed a proposal of ecocide law through their Justice Committee successfully towards the end of last year. Really interesting how kind of enthusiastic the parliamentarians were in Peru. There were actually 3 different bills of ecocide proposed at the same time for ecocide law in Peru, and they had to end up amalgamating into one bill. So that was obviously a very kind of live conversation there. So yeah, there's been. You know, it's almost there's almost so many things to say. I feel like I'm kind of tumbling one from the other, you know, from one to the other, and I feel like it would be remiss if I didn't mention Scotland, which is also moving actively forward with an ecocide law proposal, which has actually already garnered support from a large number of parliamentarians there. So that's also another very exciting development.
Thank you very much for that, Jojo. And at a time when there's been talk about slowing momentum in international climate advocacy and climate policy circles, it's really heartening to see that you're going full steam ahead and making so much progress. You also had state-level conversations with Madagascar and Burkina Faso.
Yes, indeed. I mean, these are, you know, still in discussion. There's not been public announcements yet, but there's a lot of countries now that are, you know, beginning to get very interested in developments. They can see that this is something that's moving forward, and therefore that it's, you know, it's actually going to be important not to actually miss this train, and to, you know, to join forces and to collaborate with other countries that are working on this. And I think that it's also really interesting to see how African countries, but also Latin American countries, have been engaging in this conversation. Many of those countries are members of the International Criminal Court, so that's hugely relevant for the international level conversation. And some of the issues, some of the reasons that we're coming across are ecocide law can help provide recourse and accountability where foreign investment is concerned, for example, and also with the definition that has been proposed at the International Criminal Court, which is in fact the independent expert panel definition that was convened by our foundation a few years ago. It's actually the same definition that has now been proposed at the global level. And that definition has these 2 thresholds: the severity, the sort of long-term, widespread, severe, of the damage caused or potentially caused, but also that this has to be unlawful or wanton, which has this way of tying in with existing laws and regulatory frameworks, making sure that those are enforced and followed, but also encouraging those to be developed. And that, you know, that aspect is quite important in developing countries, to allow them to effectively move forward in a safe way. So adopting ecocide law when you're a country that is in the process of economically developing, it's a way of saying to the world, we know how to do this safely. And that, I think, is a really key element that is I think, very attractive and very important, in fact, for those countries.
I hear you. Well, let's amplify something you've already mentioned: the ICC Assembly of State Parties. You said it was a crucial forum to discuss and amplify Stop Ecocide International's work. Did you want to talk more about that?
The Assembly of States Parties at the International Criminal Court is, of course, an absolutely key forum for us. Obviously, our ultimate aim is to support the recognition of ecocide as an international crime in the Rome Statute. So the place and the time in the year when those states gather is super important to us. And for the last few years, we've been supporting that conversation alongside Vanuatu and sometimes other states as well, to effectively follow what has been happening with the whole initiative. So if you like, moving from what could the International Criminal Court do to address ecological destruction to, we need a definition for this, to the next sort of layer, which is here is a definition for this, and then moving on to actually hearing some of the voices of the victims of ecocide. That was something we focused on the previous year in New York at the assembly, which was held there. And then, of course, this year was an absolute key milestone because this assembly just gone in December 24, because this was where the states which are actually proposing it and supporting this amendment to the Rome Statute were effectively with the official side event in the main plenary hall, saying to the Assembly of States Parties, this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it.
I think one of the things that's really important is to outline the number of sort of high-level global experts who are supporting you at the ICC. Because, of course, it's a court, it's a forum, it's a place where people with legal opinions and the ability to move those kinds of opinions forward in their various domestic jurisdictions come together to share opinions and build a case. So could you share with us sort of just a sample of some of the people who are working with you right now?
Yes, we had a most extraordinary event actually at the Assembly in December 24. And I mean, some of those voices were, very heavyweight voices and fantastic to have them speaking alongside those states that are really now announcing to the Assembly of States Parties that they're taking ecocide law forward. We had speakers from Vanuatu and Democratic Republic of Congo making that case, if you like. But some of the voices alongside were amazing. We had the High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. We had the Deputy Prosecutor from the ICC as the moderator for the event, which was a remarkable sort of internal endorsement, you could say. I mean, the court itself doesn't decide what goes into the statute, that's the states. But to have the Deputy Prosecutor lend her voice to chair that event felt, hugely supportive. We had Sandrine Dixon-de-Clèves, who's co-president of the Club of Rome. And we also had Professor Darrell Robinson, who was one of the legal academics who was also a diplomat who helped to set up the International Criminal Court and was involved in the original drafting of the Rome Statute. So, and that's not even an exhaustive list. So, really extraordinary event. And actually for me, a real personal milestone. I didn't have to speak at that event, which was amazing because, I mean, in previous ones, I feel like, on behalf of Stop Ecocide International, I've been kind of encouraging, states to join that conversation. They have. They're now saying it to the Assembly. And that was an amazing feeling. I was sitting backstage. I'm almost in tears, actually, just feeling, wow, what an extraordinary point to have reached. And of course, it's a milestone. It's not the end goal, but it's such a key point. And really, really amazing feeling.
I think it's excellent that you've managed to corral these incredible high-level experts to helping you at the ICC. But that wasn't the only thing going on at The Hague, because there was even more action at the ICJ. Could you talk about that? There
was indeed. So that same period at the beginning of December was also when sovereign states were giving their oral submissions to the hearings for the ICJ advisory opinion on climate change. So those two things were happening in parallel. And of course, Vanuatu is a really key player in both of those. And, working on these various different legal avenues and these two things that are really highly complementary. And we had a speaker, a professor in our event who also talked about that. And I think that there is a kind of convergence of different kinds of legal approaches to climate and ecological crisis. And these, I think, are going to emerge as very important as we move forward. We're looking at quite a chaotic geopolitical territory, if you like, around the globe. We're looking at an ever-increasing need for sort of muscular responses in some way. And we believe that one of the reasons that ecocide law is beginning to move in such an accelerated fashion is partly because of this, because there's actually a kind of concrete response that it represents and that it actually can bring to the table that is going to become increasingly important.
I couldn't agree more. I think Stop Ecocide International as an organization is part of a much bigger sort of umbrella of organizations who all want to make 2025 the year that we solidify a fairly sturdy movement that wants to see the world united on something it very much agrees with. But I also want to make sure that we don't go without talking about the 3 parliamentarian events that you did last year.
That's right. So globally, there's an increasing interest at the level of elected representatives in many countries wanting to get engaged in this conversation, whether or not their government is yet discussing it. And there is an alliance that was originally set up by a member of the European Parliament, Marie Toussaint, the Ecocide Alliance of Parliamentarians moving forward this conversation in their own parliaments. And we're kind of supporting that to sort of grow that conversation to expand. And we had some well-attended events in English, French and Spanish of parliamentarians from around the world who are interested in sort of taking this forward in their respective countries. So I think what we're seeing here is a kind of different levels of development. So there's the very obvious kind of move forward at the ICC, but then there's also this kind of supportive wave, if you like, that's starting to happen in terms of national jurisdictions developing the ecocide conversation, so that we have a kind of sort of top down, bottom up at the governmental level, you could say, that I think is something that we'll see growing, and obviously we're keen to nurture.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a consistent story of momentum and participation. Talk to us in a bit more detail about upcoming events for 2025.
I think what's going to be interesting this year is there's a kind of real shift in what we're able to access in terms of conversations, in terms of high-level fora, and in terms of what's needed next for this work. Because when we started out, it was very grassroots. It was very much, here we have a demand. We want you to talk about this. We want you to engage in this conversation, and that kind of a kind of activation, if you like. Moving forward to a kind of how do we encourage as many people as possible to join this conversation? But now there's a step beyond that, because as I said earlier, it's like the train has left the station. The direction of travel is established, and it is now at the high level. It's now a diplomatic conversation that is moving forward at the level of the ICC, and is also, as I say, supported by sort of regional and national conversations as well. So what I keep seeing in my mind is almost like a graph where there's lots of sort of crossing points and points of interest across the middle of the graph, and this conversation about ecocide law is this line that's kind of going up through there and kind of then can kind of run along the top somehow. And it's a very visual image, but yeah, it sort of feels like the focus has become much more about advising, informing, supporting a conversation that is already happening, and a legislative initiative, if you like, that is well underway now. And that, I think, is a bit of a sea change in what has our jobs been as an organisation. We now want to be as supportive as we can for those states that are interested in moving this conversation forward.
Sure. So for 2025, there is, the obvious question people are going to ask are analogous to what you've already achieved in 2024. So they're going to want to know what you're doing in the road to Belém, for example. Mm-hmm. They'll want to know what you're doing in terms of other COPs, for example, the UN COP on desertification, which I mentioned earlier on pre-camera, because that ties into your conversations with Burkina Faso and others. They'll be curious about how you want to encourage more participation, both from your viewing members as well as organisations who might want to support you. So do you want to paint a picture for 2025?
Let's have a go at doing that. I think definitely we're going to be looking at some of the other UN contexts, like the Desertification Treaty, like the Disaster Risk Reduction one, and the Office on Drugs and Crime. There's a number of different events and convenings where this conversation is now going to be easier to bring into the proceedings, perhaps. And that's one of the things that we'd definitely like to be focusing on. One particular area which is interesting is the IUCN, which is unusual in that it has both NGO and governments that are voting members of that organisation. So it's a huge global union for the conservation of nature, so made up of lots and lots of different organisations. And we're putting forward, alongside states and NGOs, a resolution in support of ecocide law. And that's really interesting because, of course, all of the member states, and there are 80 odd, will need to consider all of those motions. So that's a very helpful way of bringing that into the conversation. So there's a number of different kind of contexts, if you like, where this will become relevant. And there's the same, we're also looking at groups of states and kind of blocks, how they, for example, Association of Small Island States, the Organization of African and Caribbean Pacific States. There are many groupings that will also, we trust, be taking an interest now in the Ecocide Law Initiative. So those are a number of areas that we could be looking at. And I very much hope that, that the audience will actually kind of have a look at some of the coverage that has happened in over the past year. You can find a lot of this information on the website, but also keep an eye out for where this conversation is going to come up in different sectors, and of course bring it up themselves in their own networks. We also certainly encourage people to continue to support. It's amazing how far it goes when people can make sort of regular donations to this work, and we will need to be stepping up this year. There's probably going to be quite a bit more in terms of diplomatic events and travel that will need to be stepped into as far as our sort of teams and our work is concerned. So there's a lot that can be done to support that. I think the overall picture is very exciting. It's very positive. It feels like I don't know if you can say such a thing as a concrete spark of hope. It feels like you talked about something solidifying. It feels like that this is very much an initiative that has found its feet. It's already moving, but it has a kind of weightiness in terms of the ability of criminal law to address what is happening on the planet. The year has already got off to a running start. We've already been at the Oxford Oil Farming Conference. I'm going to be in Liechtenstein at the World Systemic Forum this week. I'm going to be in Canada next month for the Global Exchange Conference. We're also going to be doing events in New York, and that's literally just the next few weeks. So, we're looking also at having a presence at the continuation of the CBD talks in Rome. So this is just a kind of initial flavour, but it's looking to be a very a busy year. One with a different flavour, as I explained, but also I think one where we're going to see the snowball continue to roll.
Excellent. I think just in continuing with the theme of continuity, the online meetings you've had for parliamentarians last year could easily be replicated in 2025.
Indeed.
Within the context of need and jurisdiction. And I think one of the things I'd like to amplify about the way Stop Ecocide International works and the Stop Ecocide movement in general is that it's one of those parts of environmental change that cut across the spectrum. Everyone agrees that ecocide's a bad thing. The only question is the nuance. And in delivering a definition people are working towards, Stop Ecocide is incredibly good at helping people coalesce and build things forward. So I agree with you. I think 2025 is going to be an exciting year. Much to look forward to.
I'd also just like to say a quick thank you to Be the Earth Foundation, who have provided us with this wonderful location in London for our recording today.